Good afternoon, everyone. This is Shylo. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Affirming Ministries Coordinator of Edmonton, based out of the Robertson Wesley United Church. Today is our Affirming Reflections live stream. It is going to be the last one of 2020. Hooray that we're almost done this year. Today's topic is going to be about gender-neutral washrooms. So if you aren't familiar with gender-neutral washrooms, stay tuned. We'll learn a little bit about gender-neutral washrooms, who uses them, some of the controversies between them, and hopefully give you some tools on how to bring this information to your own schools, workplaces, churches, or even just sharing the information with some friends. So let's hop in right now. So what are gender-neutral washrooms? So we've heard these terms quite a bit. They're also known as unisex washrooms or gender-inclusive washrooms. Sometimes you've seen signs that say all gender washrooms or even just a washroom sign. So these refer to public washrooms that are not separated by gender or sex. I'm sure all of you are familiar with what a washroom looks like, and you are probably familiar with the fact that there are usually two different types of washrooms. There are washrooms for men, and then there's washrooms for women. And this is how it's been for quite a long time, and this is how I've grown up, and many of you grown up. Unfortunately, this is just the way it is for now. Who knows? But gender-neutral washrooms are essentially just washrooms that are used by anyone, regardless of gender or regardless of sex. There are different types of gender-neutral washrooms that you may be familiar with or may have seen. So there's the most common, which are the single occupancy facilities. So this is where it's like a single room or enclosure. You can usually find these in certain Starbucks or cafes where it's just a single room with a washroom and with a toilet and a sink, and it locks on the door, and there's no one else that's able to enter into it. Some of the more controversial gender-neutral washrooms are the multi-user facilities. So these are like a standard washroom with multi-stalls where multiple people can enter into the washroom. But of course, the toilets are then enclosed in some sort of enclosure, whereas the sinks and other facility areas are open for anyone to use. So gender-neutral washrooms may either replace some single-sex washrooms. So I know a lot of the Starbucks recently, in the last few years, have changed their washrooms. I remember going into some of the washrooms and they would have single-stalled washrooms, one for men and one for women, even though they were exact same on the inside. We've started to see a lot of these places that have those types of washrooms replacing them to be gender-neutral. Or if there are more than two, if you have 3 or 4 single stalled washrooms, a lot of them have been adding 1 or 2 of them to be gender neutral while still keeping the sex segregated washrooms available. Gender-neutral washrooms are also very common in places where space is limited. If anyone's ever been on an airplane, you know that there's usually only one, or if you're on a larger airplane, sometimes 2 washrooms. These are both always gender-neutral. Even things like passenger trains, even in our own homes. I know my partner and I have one washroom and we're opposite genders, and we don't have our own bathroom for each other. We share one, and most of you in your own homes share a washroom with your family members. Another common gender-neutral washroom that we may be familiar with is portable toilets. So porta potties, things like that, they're not gender segregated either. So sex-separated washrooms or sex-segregated washrooms, these are compiled into either male or female. So some of these washrooms are separated and enforced by local laws or building codes. Some of the key differences between men and women's washrooms in the western side of the world, in the western countries here, is usually if you walk into a men's washroom, there is usually the presence of urinals. And then if you walk into a women's washroom, it is usually the sanitary bins for menstrual products that are usually within each stall. So these are just the key differences. Other than that, we're all human. We all use the washroom the same way. So the use of toilets, stalls, and sinks, all of that is technically gender neutral. We are not that different anatomy-wise, so the main difference is the addition of urinals and the menstrual products bins. For folks wanting to know a little bit of the history, I always love diving into some of the history and the context to these topics. Some of the historical purposes of sex-separated toilets in the United States and in Europe are, as well as the timing of when they appeared, are still disputed by a lot of scholars. There still isn't a lot of information or knowledge of why or when these bathrooms came about and why they started to become segregated. But these are some of the, I guess, theorized reasons why. So some scholars suggest that it was the safety from sexual harassment and privacy that was likely the two of the main goals of why bathrooms were sex segregated. Some other factors scholars say is sometimes morality, so having that not being able to see, women in their own private spaces, or even if we're even thinking about, in religious areas, even folks who identify as Muslim, even places like, for them, even in their worship areas, they are segregated, and they're only allowed to show, women in Muslim countries are only allowed to show their hair to their husbands. So there's a lot of kind of morality behind even washroom use in this idea of separating men and women, just so that men can't see women and women can then be hidden from men. So a lot of it is very sexual in nature, which is very unfortunate. Another reason why, and a lot of scholars believe that this leads to the reason why bathrooms were segregated in the late 19th century, was the resistance to women entering the workforce. So there was a lot of kind of women trying to join in the workforce, and so a lot of places of work and a lot of factories were then either forced to or required to add a certain bathroom just for the women in the workforce. And that was a kind of a way to kind of separate them and kind of make them seem as if they weren't part of the community or part of the workforce. They were kind of then still segregated. So it was not really meant to give them their own private space. It was more so, you're not a part of our community, so here is your own separate washroom, your separate area to work. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of women's groups and feminist groups around today that are still worried and advocate against gender-neutral washrooms, and they believe that gender-neutral washrooms are, in fact, less safe for women, whereas public sex-segregated washrooms are more safe for women. I do want to just say that gender-neutral washrooms have not been deemed less safe. There is no I guess, documentation or reports that uphold that. A lot of it is just a lot of, myths and fear-mongering that have come with that. Not to say that those fears aren't valid. A lot of women, majority of women, are still subjected to violence and sexual harassment, and so these are still very important fears to have, but to fight against the transgender community is not the right way to do it. So I think in the next few years to come, we will definitely find a really good balance between providing that safety for women in a world of violence, but as well as providing that safety for trans women and trans folks also in a world of violence. So who uses these washrooms? So I talked a little bit about women and men and a few about trans folks, but who uses these? Why are these important, and why would we want them anyway? So gender-neutral washrooms can benefit actually a range of people. The best part about gender-neutral washrooms is that it's gender-neutral. So this means that anyone can use it, regardless of their gender, age, sex, whatever. They are able to use it. This is one of my biggest advocates for the use of gender-neutral washrooms. As much as myself as a trans person, I'm very proactive in wanting to have gender-neutral spaces for trans folks, but I also want to kind of show more of why it's important to have them, and so some of these are the reasons why. So people with disabilities are able to use these washrooms. A lot of gender-neutral washrooms are also deemed the family washrooms, or the they still call it the handicapped washrooms. A lot of places have been starting to term that not to be handicapped, but rather inclusive washrooms. I know places like the city of Edmonton, a lot of their pools are starting to have inclusive change rooms and inclusive washrooms rather than calling them handicap or disabled washrooms. As well as elderly folks can use these washrooms. Or even folks who need help with a healthcare aid. So there's a lot of times where there'll be folks that come into facilities who require an aid, and sometimes the aid is a different gender than the person who is requiring the aid, and so going into washrooms sometimes is not feasible because of the gender segregation. And so having some sort of gender-neutral washroom is very helpful for folks who require aids or with disabilities who need that kind of space. Another reason why gender-neutral washrooms are so important and valid is because people are parents, you know? There's usually some sort of gender variation between parents and children, and so sometimes parents need a space where they're able to enter into a washroom with their child in order to help them facilitate using the washroom, especially for folks who, you know, who may be with their father and may have young girls. There's no way that the man can go into the female washroom without being forced out for obvious reasons. And so having these spaces allow parents to be able to be more comfortable in helping their children use the washrooms, as well as helping the children be more comfortable while still being around their parents instead of having to go to the washroom by themselves. I know those are just a few examples. The main example of why gender-neutral washrooms are so important right now is because it's been driven by the transgender community. And the reason for this is to help us combat the harassment and violence against us. Majority of the violence comes from being in places where folks don't think we belong. And so unfortunately, bathrooms and change rooms are one of these reasons. So if a trans person does enter into the gender washroom that they are identifying with, sometimes they are more subjected to violence and harassment than if they were to enter just a gender-neutral washroom. So just to reiterate, gender-neutral washrooms can be used by people of any sex, any gender, or any gender identity. So this is what makes them so desirable for the transgender community, especially those who are gender non-conforming and or non-binary. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about bathroom bills. So I know I mentioned that there's a few women and feminist groups that are going against gender-neutral washrooms. The most common and recent bathroom bill, or I guess controversy around gender-neutral washrooms, came from the 2016 bill called the Public Facilities Privacy and Security Act, also known as House Bill 2 or HB 2. So this is from North Carolina, so many of you may be familiar with this. It was actually passed in March of 2016, where it was signed into law by Governor Pat McCrory, and the bill amended the state law to preempt any anti-discrimination ordinances passed by local communities, and controversially, it compelled schools and public facilities containing single gender-neutral washrooms to only allow people of the corresponding sex as listed on their birth certificate to use them. So I guess to sum that up, this bill pretty much told the people of North Carolina that the bathrooms you are only allowed in is the bathroom that has the same symbol as your birth certificate. I don't know who carries their birth certificate into a washroom. I know I don't. I have it locked in a little safe. I know many people might have their birth certificates with them, but I personally just find this law just absolutely ridiculous. In the fact that they even assumed that someone would have their birth certificate on them at all times just to use a washroom. But here we are. The bill passed, and it caused a lot of controversy. So actually, I'm going to show you a photo here. Give me 1 second. And so this photo here is a photo of Michael Hughes. He was pretty common, and his photo was shared widely through Facebook and other social media means. and showing how ridiculous these bathroom bills can be. So Michael Hughes did not have his birth certificate updated, and so his birth certificate still had female on it. And so for him, this is how he looked like now. He's gone through the stages of his own personal transition, which resulted to him looking like this. And this bill required him, legally, to enter into women's bathrooms because of his birth certificate. And so even walking into the washroom like this, it's supposed to, these bills were meant to help protect women and make them feel safer so that men didn't enter these washrooms. So they were doing this to prevent trans women from entering the washrooms, but then they were forcing trans men into these washrooms. And so these bills kind of just did a full circle where they were trying to do something with protecting women from men, yet letting trans men enter the rooms, even though they did look like men. And so I find this photo absolutely funny, where it's like, yeah, I look like a man, I am a man, I'm going to enter the men's washrooms, yet the laws are telling me I shouldn't because, you know, it's wrong for me to enter into a men's washroom, but it's perfectly okay for me to enter into a woman's washroom looking like this. I know I had a lot of that familiar understandings as well of I would be super uncomfortable going into a women's washroom, not only for myself, but for the women around me. They might just be taken aback by a man walking in, right? And so I find this photo just absolutely funny. So there's photos like this that have gone around. There's many different photos going around of similar folks, of trans women and trans men going into these washrooms and taking photos of themselves in these washrooms, and just showing just how ridiculous these bathroom bills can be. One of the first known bathroom bills, which is also why a lot of the scholars think that these sex-segregated washrooms were created in the late 19th century with the more involvement of women in work, was in Massachusetts. There was a law that mandated sex separation in 1887, and it was titled An Act to Secure Proper Sanitary Provisions in Factories and Workshops. What a long name. So this law actually required establishments to have a separate washroom in businesses, so that it was suitable and separate for the women in the workplace. Even some advocates, even now in 2013, or I guess now, that's quite a long time ago, but advocates in 2013 said that all gender-neutral washrooms were designed to ensure that toilets were fully accessible to all members of society. So they argued that gender-neutral washrooms eliminated discrimination and harassment for people who may have been perceived to be in the wrong bathroom. There's also advocates that argue that many of the public toilets that we see now in the sanitation facilities have historically and still are not meeting the needs of the LGBTQ communities. And they argue that this is an issue with respect to human rights to the access of water and sanitation. And they also argue that those outside of the gender binary face harassment and threat of physical violence without access to these gender-neutral washrooms, and many hate crimes have been taking place following transgender people using the washrooms that others deem that they are using that's incorrectly. So it's not that the trans people are using the incorrect washrooms, it's the people in the washrooms thinking that trans folks are using the wrong washrooms. And I got a message here from Pan. Also, it's super dangerous for trans people. Yes, exactly. Going into bathrooms that don't identify with your gender identity can be very harmful. And not having access to gender-neutral washrooms, especially for folks who may not be comfortable enough going into sex-segregated washrooms, this also allows them to be more safe in their washrooms. I know for me, I worked as a lifeguard. I still work as a lifeguard even though I'm laid off because of COVID. Yay. But when I did work as a lifeguard, there was oftentimes before my transition, before I started hormones, that I did not feel comfortable enough going into a men's washroom. Just because of my own safety and my own fear of being harassed. And it wasn't until I started using hormones and having a good friend group in my workplace that allowed me to feel a lot more comfortable going into these washrooms. And eventually got to a point where my transition had gotten to a point where going into a women's washroom was no longer feasible. And so going into those washrooms was not safe for me either. And so I thankfully, the workplace that I was at and the schools that I were at all had some sort of gender-neutral washroom, which was really great because those were the spaces that I entered into when I was not safe or comfortable going into any of the sex-segregated washrooms. And it wasn't until I started feeling comfortable that I started using the men's washroom, but I still love using gender-neutral washrooms here and there when they are available. Last but not least, let's talk a little bit about some easy options for gender-neutral washrooms and how you can help. So these are the different types of ways in which we can have gender-neutral washrooms. So one of them is having one or more single occupancy or family bathrooms and designating it and labeling it to be gender-neutral or all-gender. So this right here is what a sign would look like. This is a really basic sign. These are usually the signs that have been the most common as of recently. Instead of having, there's some signs that people have where it'll show gender neutral washroom or all gender washroom, and it'll have both a man and a woman symbol on it. These signs are still not that great just because it does still show that there's a gender binary. These new gender neutral or all gender washroom signs with just a toilet on them is absolutely fantastic. It is such a great symbol because it's universal. It's something that can be put on any washroom. If you see that, you know exactly what it is. And it's also helpful for folks that don't know English either. These signs are very useful. And so taking away that man and woman on it really, really helps. And thanks, Pan. I know I'm loving these photo sharings now. I'm getting a little bit high tech here. So another way to have an easy option for a gender-neutral washroom is, does your facility or school or church have 3 or more multi-stalled bathrooms? And if so, think about maybe turning 1 or 2 of them into a gender-neutral bathroom. You can either do this by keeping them multi-stalled or converting it into a single occupancy bathroom by installing a occupied or unoccupied lock on the external door. So having multi-stall or single-stall doesn't really change that much in how gender-neutral it can be. But it also affects kind of the comfortability of the folks using it, because sometimes having a multi-stall bathroom may be a little bit more scary than a single stall for some folks. But multi-stalled washrooms are totally available. I worked at the Clearview Rec Center, which had multi-stalled gender-inclusive change room, and in my 2 years of working there, never had any incidences of anyone being harassed or spied on or violated in any way. Everyone's quite respectful in those areas. Another way that you can include a gender-neutral washroom in your space or area is, do you have space to build a 3rd washroom? This can be an option as well. Consider the steps that you may take to create either the bathrooms that you have already to be more inclusive, by making all of them all gender, or you can label the bathrooms to be a little bit more comfortable sounding. So maybe instead of saying this is a bathroom for women, this is a bathroom for men, you can change the language and say this bathroom has urinals and this bathroom has stalls. So those are other options that you can do as well. There's also another way that you could do this as well. So it's if you're either renting or sharing a building space where you don't have any control over the bathrooms, you can either, one, discuss with your landlord or the tenants in making them gender neutral, or you can do making a post or a sign in which you can carry with you and attach to and attached to the signs to cover them up while you're using that space. I know I've done this a few times in some of the spaces that I've entered into and have had to either run programs or do events. I have 2 all-gender washrooms that look exactly like this sign. Mine are not the fancy blue, mine are the fancy black. But I have them laminated and ready to go, and I bring them everywhere with me so that I can cover up any of the bathroom signs just to make them gender neutral again. Here we have a comment from Brittany that says, I know I have had a workplace where there was an issue with a couple of coworkers that I was caught in the middle of to do with another coworker's gender identity. I filed a harassment report about it and nothing was done. Oh, that's too bad. To clarify, are you talking about were the coworkers harassing someone's gender identity? Is that what you're trying to get at, Brittany? I'll wait for your comment here. Another way of having gender-neutral washrooms in a space that you are, if you have it or if you're renting, to be sure that you have signs by your bathrooms or elsewhere that direct people to both the gender-neutral washrooms or the gender-specific bathrooms. So if you do indeed get a gender-neutral washroom and you have it, don't keep it hidden. Try to keep it out and open and allow folks to know that it is a possibility and where it is. So having maps is really, really helpful. I know when I was at the King's University, I had a photo of the map of the school, and I put where all the gender-neutral washrooms were so that folks can easily look it up. I know the U of A, if you take a look at their website, they have an interactive map, actually, where you can go into the U of A map, and you can search up where all the gender-neutral washrooms are, and it'll show you where. I know there's a lot of other apps that are around and websites that are around where you can look up gender-neutral washrooms in the area that you are in, but unfortunately some of the areas aren't updated or aren't as accurate as they could be, so I don't have any of those to share with you right now because I haven't found one that's been the best as of yet. But if I do, I'll definitely share it. And lastly, making it clear that all people may use the bathroom that is right for them. Some transgender people desired gender-neutral washroom spaces, like I stated when I was at the beginning of my transition. Some identify as women and men and should not be pressured or forced out of women's or men's washrooms. So just having any and all washrooms, I think, is helpful. So having at least 3 washrooms, one for women, one for men, and one for all genders is helpful. But I really hope that we do get a point in our society that those gender segregated washrooms are no longer necessary, and we can just have all gender washrooms all the time, just because it's super helpful. I know transition for me, waiting in a women's lineup for the washroom after a football game or a concert was the absolute worst. And so sometimes things like that can definitely help. Gender neutral washrooms can definitely help with lineups and things that take too much time. Here we have Britt's response. Coworkers put me in the middle of a situation where they were essentially harassing a coworker who was in the restroom, wanted me to be their security guard because they didn't want to enter the restroom while that person was in there. Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, that's absolutely unacceptable. And there are a lot of people who do that. I know for me, with my city training, we were told that if someone had come to us and were being not bad about it, but came up to us and shared concerns that they were not feeling safe to enter into a washroom when there was a trans person or a gender non-conforming person in the washroom. It was our goal to then educate the person that came up to us to say that they did have every right to be in that washroom, and then to show them that if they are uncomfortable, that there are other options for them to enter into. But it was our goal to not ever talk to the person that was gender neutral or transgender and allow them to enter that space because they rightfully are able to. And our job was just to educate and guide the person that had the concerns to enter into a different washroom, or just to educate them to show them that what they're trying to say or what they're trying to do is not appropriate, and to let those people just use the washroom in need be, especially if they're not doing anything wrong. If they're just using the washroom or changing or doing what they need to do and not doing anything that is against any of the rules, then there's no reason to do that. But it sucks that you filed the report and nothing was done about it. But it's good that you were able to, you know, kind of share this situation, because it does happen. A lot of people think that these situations are, you know, newsworthy or are in, you know, shows or in online and social media and those things being shared around. But in reality, this happens quite often that we see. So thanks, Britt, for sharing that with us. But yeah, so that's all I had today for our gender-neutral washrooms. So if you ever want any more information, please feel free to tune in and message me either through Facebook or send me an email or give me a call. I'm going to post this all-gender washroom sign on my Affirming Ministries page, so if you ever feel like printing it off and having it available for yourself, you can do that, kind of like how I do. If you have any other stories or comments, please throw them into the chat or the comments below, and I'd love to read them. And if you have any stories about yourself, if you've entered into a gender-neutral washroom, or if you've entered into a space that didn't have a gender-neutral washroom, I'd love to hear some of those stories as well. We have here another comment from Pan. On the other side, if trans people were uncomfortable or feeling unsafe, they often ask for cis friends to accompany them. Yes, exactly. This is a really great way of being an ally. If you are a cis person and you do have someone in your friend group or family that is trans and they are feeling a little bit scared or nervous to enter into a washroom, sometimes if you're available to do so, entering with them is really, really helpful. I know that was one of the main reasons why I started using the men's change rooms early on in my transition, was because of the male friends in my workspace that were ready to help me and back me up if needed. So yeah, that's a good point of putting out Pan. So yeah, that's a great way of being an ally. It's just helping and being there, just as another person and another body in the space. So it just makes people feel a little bit more comfortable, especially if it's their first time or first few times of entering into a washroom that's new to them. I know the first time I went into a men's washroom, I was, you know, nervous as hell, and it was definitely one of the scariest things ever. But ever since then, men's washrooms have been nothing but comfortable for me, thankfully, and I'm very blessed for that. And so that's why I still want to advocate for these gender-neutral washrooms, because they are very important to have, especially for folks that aren't comfortable yet entering into sex-segregated spaces. So yeah, so those are just some of the information and the history about gender-neutral washrooms, and I gave a few tools and resources on how you can enter into and create some gender-neutral washrooms in your own spaces of work and worship. So I hope that this has been a little bit helpful. And Pan says, thanks for addressing us, no problem. And I think Robertson Wesley still has split washrooms, but they do say trans inclusive. Yes, so yeah, Robertson Wesley still unfortunately does have 2 sex segregated washrooms. There is one staff washroom downstairs in the basement that's gender neutral. But anytime that I'm doing any LGBTQ programs, I do put the all gender washroom signs over top. But we do say in our statements and policies that the bathrooms are comfortable for anyone who is wishing to use it, so please enter whichever one that you are comfortable in. So yeah, so thanks so much for tuning in. Again, this is the last live stream of 2020. So the next live stream is going to be in January. I've started to switch them up next year in 2021. My live streams won't be weekly anymore, unfortunately. They're going to be once a month. They're going to be a little bit longer. They're going to be more workshop based. So the next one is going to be January 18th. It's still going to be Mondays at noon. But it's going to be on the 3rd Monday of the month. And so stay tuned for that. I'll be posting a lot of information and posters about it, so stay tuned for the next live stream for then. But until then, we do have one last coffee hour again this week before the holiday break. So that'll be December 17th. So in a few days at 11 a.m. we have our Affirming Coffee Hour. Send me a message or an email for the link for that, because it's on Zoom. And we'd love to kind of have you join us and chat for the hour. And if you can't join us then, I will see you around, and if not, I will see you in the new year. Alright, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.